Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and this is going to be a full first look at the PROBINATOR-8700, which this motherboard considers an 8700K because that's what it's based on. So, yeah, if you've been on the AHOC, if you've been in the YouTube channel's community tab, you should know at this point what we're going to be taking a look at today. But yeah, so let's take a look at it. So we got the oscilloscope here. It's running a 20 megahertz bandwidth limit because we're just looking at like power transients, that kind of thing. So we don't need more bandwidth than that. And if we have it unlimited, then it's just going to pick up a bunch of random noise and we're not going to see anything. Yeah, so we're gonna run some Prime 95 on this 8700K, and we're gonna check out the measurements with this here Z390 Phantom Gaming ITX board. And yeah, I've not yet validated how accurate this how well the Probinator actually works, but so far it's been showing me exactly what I've been expecting to see. So I'm pretty confident that it's working as intended, but I do need to test it with more motherboards. And yeah, so let's start messing with settings, shall we? So yeah. We can start at like level 5 LLC, and we're gonna like work up to higher LLC settings as well. Basically just gonna look at like how that affects the peak to peak voltage, which is down here. And then we obviously have like, so average voltage is like what your software monitoring software will read out. Minimum voltage is generally what's going to affect stability. If your minimum voltage is like, if that goes lower, that's bad. If your minimum voltage is low, then yeah, that causes crashes. Max voltage is the one that you're kind of concerned about for not so much like electromigration, because short high voltage spikes, they're not really like, there's not like electromigration is a consequence of current. So just having a lot of voltage and very little current doesn't, like, you get that voltage spike because the current is stopping. That's kind of the whole point. So yeah, it's not really an electromigration hazard. It's an oxide breakdown hazard though. But unfortunately, I have no, like, you'd have to basically ask Intel for like how much voltage is too much voltage. Like at what point will the like insulation inside the CPU start breaking down? Because that's the main concern. If you have a lot of voltage, it'll start breaking down things like the gate oxide, and there's other like oxide there's other uses for oxides in semiconductors. I just don't know of them because yeah, I'm not my area of expertise, but at the very least, like, gate oxide breakdown is a concern with high voltages, and that could be caused by like a transient spike, but yeah, anyway, so we're going to start at level 5, 1.42 volts. This is 8700K. We're at 4.9 gigahertz because well, I want the CPU to be somewhat stable. Well, I don't want the CPU crashing. So basically, we're running a relatively low clock speed, but at a rather high voltage. There is liquid metal on this, so it actually runs really cool, which is great. Like, I love that. Liquid metal is freaking awesome. So yeah, so we're just going to run some level 5 LLC. And actually, like, I already know what the results for, like, this motherboard are, assuming that this is accurate. It's just, like, run level 2 or 3. Because at level 4, it doesn't actually improve your peak-to-peak at all. It doesn't do anything. It's like you're still getting the same amount of overshoot and undershoot and everything. It's just that now your average voltage is lower, your minimum voltage is lower, like, everything is just worse. So, yeah. We're just going to load in. So now we're in. I'm going to open up hardware info. Run and get Prime 95, and we are going to run like the AVX version. Close that. All FFTs, and we're going to go with custom because there's, as usual, there's a difference between the different FFT sizes in terms of how they behave under load. So like small FFTs like 16K will actually be really like, will have a lot of V-droop, but we're not going to have a lot of like transient on there because yeah, it's a very consistent load. It's not very variable. Also, the vid reading right here, as you can clearly see, is completely inaccurate, right? Our average voltage right now is about 1.39 volts, and that vid reading right there, you should ignore it. And for that matter, let's check what CPU-Z is reading, because I know a lot of people check their core voltage with CPU-Z, and it's just like, no. Like, what? Oh, it's actually accurate for this board. So that's good. But yeah, this right here, you should just ignore that at all times, basically. CPU-Z, in a surprising turn of events, is not completely off. So, yeah, I'm surprised by that. But, yeah, also, if you're wondering what if we go here, like what these dips are, that's actually the Windows event timer. So if I have a little tool here that we can use to adjust and I'm going to have to close CPU-Z because I want the system to like idle a bit. So yeah, now it's idling. So here we can adjust so right now we're at like 16.25 milliseconds or 15.6 milliseconds according to that readout. And if I set it to 6 milliseconds, you can now see that those spikes much more frequent. So that's just the Windows event timer. That's not like it's the CPU doing CPU things, right? And that just looks like that. And we'd have to zoom in on it a lot more, but basically you can see how like it loads up a little bit, then it loads up more, and then it levels off. So yeah, anyway, we're gonna zoom back out of that, back to 20 milliseconds, and now we're just gonna unset. So I just reset that, and we're gonna put hardware info on this side so that you can actually see it. On this vCore reading is actually, like on this motherboard, that's surprisingly accurate. Normally, because that's the Super I/O reading right here. So the Nuvoton, however you pronounce that right there. So yeah, that's the Super I/O. That reading is, on a lot of motherboards, that is completely wrong, and on this one, it's actually surprisingly accurate. So if we run small FFTs, yeah, the spikes basically get inverted, because now so when you're sitting at idle, the CPU is not doing anything, and then the event timer takes over and it loads up. Whereas when you're running Prime 95, when the event timer takes over, it basically unloads the system because it stalls out Prime 95 temporarily, and you get that nice big voltage spike right there. Yeah, but as you can see, our average voltage is like 1.2 volts right now. I'm just going to move Prime 95 out of, like, scaled wrong there. We're going to put it over here. And yeah, you can see that our voltage reading is actually surprisingly accurate. It's reading a little bit above what the scope is reading, but I'm willing to tolerate that. Like 1.2, yeah, 1.2. So right now they're matched. Our peak to peak is about 140 millivolts. Actually, if we reset the counter on that, right, if we so basically if I was I'm still gonna work, I'm still working out a test methodology, but basically my plan for testing like transient response on Z390 motherboards is to just stick the probinator in every single motherboard I can be bothered to, and then just monitor the peak to peak voltage values at different LLC settings, because obviously you want to test all the different LLC settings. Yeah, monitor to that and take like a 200 or a large number of samples, because as you can see, it doesn't take that long. We already have 140 samples, and that's because every time it refreshes the screen, it basically takes more that counts as a sample. And the reason why I have it set to 20 milliseconds and not just like one spike at a time is because I want from the lowest basically if you zoom in on one spike a bit, it's actually going to bring the peak to peak down, because it measures from the lowest point anywhere in the measurement against the highest point anywhere in the measurement, and that's what I want. So I want the lowest minimum against the highest peak, right? Because otherwise it's just it's pointless. Anyway, our minimum voltage right now is about 1.18 volts on average. And that's at 300 samples, and our peak to peak is about 130 millivolts peak to peak. But this is not the worst thing we can run, right? This is like small FFTs, so it's very hot. It loads up the CPU quite hard, right? Like CPU temperature during that was, where's the CPU temperature? There. So CPU was hitting 60s. I love liquid metal. It's so awesome. So yeah. 60s on the CPU, but where is it? Yeah, so, you know, it was running pretty hot, but ultimately it wasn't actually like that like it isn't that much of a mess, because there's another, like if we run, say, 192K FFT size, which actually I want to do that. So 192, 192, then you get this lovely mess. And surprisingly enough, right now that's holding at 120 millivolts. So yeah, basically it's like I need to take a couple different measurements. I guess I'll do a combination of like a small FFT with also this measurement as well. Because this one right now is doing lower, but on some of the higher LLC settings, this one would actually be worse. Minimum voltage is up. So yeah, and our average voltage is 1.25 volts. Our peak voltage is 1.32. And V-core reading is actually pretty dead on, and the CPU isn't running as hot doing this. But you can see how it's potentially quite a bit noisier, because basically what we're looking at right now, like what's causing, like previously the only thing that was causing the spikes was the Windows timer ticking over. Now what's basically happening is because we're on a larger FFT size, the CPU basically runs out of cache every so often, and when that happens it stalls out, and that causes the spikes to pop up. I'm actually impressed it's not that high. Like it's 120 millivolts peak to peak. But we'll stop that, and let's see if there's another. Like there's probably like a very like it depends on the CPU, like what FFT size is the worst. So yeah, that's something that you kind of need to test. So let's try 256. As you get larger FFT sizes, it's actually less hot. Like the CPU on average pulls less power. So yeah. Yeah, so that's actually just straight up lower. Now it's doing 110. Stop. And torture test. Custom. Well, small FFTs, custom. I think 128 is the other size that we can go for. Okay, 128 is bad. Yeah, so 128 is worse. So now it's doing like 130, 140 again. Yeah, and the CPU is getting hotter again, and yeah. So we can say like 130-ish millivolts for this, and it's gonna have 100 samples pretty soon. But I'm not too bothered right now because we're like I'm just showing off like the thing, how it works. So we'll stop that. But I do want to show you like what if we run like really high LLC levels. Like what if we just max out the LLC? So right now we were getting around 130 millivolts, right, peak to peak. Worst, well, 140 worst case scenario was like the highest measurement I saw, and on average it was doing like 135, 130-ish, right? So anyway, if we now go to like level 2 is actually still a relatively reasonable LLC to run on this motherboard. Level 3, level 2, pretty good settings. Now this motherboard like this is something like ASRock needs to stop automating their BIOSes, because that's stupid, right? Like if you change the voltage on this motherboard, it'll default the LLC to level 1, which in my opinion is just why you would ever want to, like, no. Like, this is not the optimal setting. Like, level 2 is optimal. So we're actually going to run a comparison between level 2 and level 1 right now. Because the thing is, even on level 2, like, there's a little bit of V-droop, but it's not a ton of V-droop, which is what you're aiming for. And obviously the really cool thing about this measurement method is that I can stick this CPU into literally any motherboard, and it should be, the measurements should be really consistent. So if we get Prime 95 open again. You know what I really hate? How you can't drag the worker window in Prime 95 until you start a workload. Like, that's stupid, in my opinion. Yeah, okay, now it's in the right location. Good. Small FFTs, custom, and we're just going to go straight to 128. 28. And we're going to scroll down to vCore, right? And then we're going to go, okay. And yeah, you can still see how it's still roughly actually, yeah, it's still around like that 140 millivolts mark. It's actually like 10 millivolts worse, you could say. Yeah. And then you need to run it for a while before you can really draw any conclusion, right? But that's kind of that. Our average voltage is, so this hardware info is reading 1.37, the scope is reading 1.39. That's probably just down to the fact that the scope is actually picking up all of the spikes, whereas the software is like, the software doesn't see all of that. So, actually I wonder if we set the RMS, like, oh no, that's going to push, yeah, okay, I can't have more voltage, more monitoring stuff running at the same time right now. Actually, wait a minute, no I can. I've forgotten how to delete item 2. Good. So now if we go back to channel 1, I want RMS. There we go. Nope, RMS is reading the same as average. So yeah, software reads a little bit lower. But that's actually like, that's fine. I'm impressed that this measures accurately at all. So right now we're getting about 10 millivolts more peak to peak, right? So that's actually not that bad, right? Compared to what we were running previously, which was like a ton of E-droop. So the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that your peak to peak is just going to get worse as you have a higher average voltage just because of more current going into the CPU. So this really, like, basically I'd say the transient response hasn't changed. It's just that now there's more load on the VRM. And the VRM can't really do much about that. So I'm going to stop that. And we're going to try what the small FFTs test looks like. 16. And there. And that actually looks quiet. Right? Like that's 100 millivolts on the timer interrupts. Yeah, that's actually quieter than the 128 FFT size. Though the CPU is running significantly hotter now because obviously our average voltage is way up. Well, it's not actually up. It's just like, yeah, it's running more current. Minimum voltage is about 1.34 volts. So that's neat. Now let's take a look at what maxed out LLC looks like. So if we run actual level 1. Now if we just go straight to level 1. So minimum voltage was like 1.34 previously. Well, actually I needed to reset the counter. But yeah, like this is not a proper measurements. I'm not going to try to do proper measurements on video. But yeah, like I have a nice little test tool to use because I can just take this and stick this in any other motherboard. There's no worrying about like, you know, because the thing is if you're measuring from the back of the socket, you can run into issues that are like the voltage measurement is different because of the power plane impedance. The voltage measurement is different because maybe one motherboard uses a higher gold content socket, so it has better contact with the CPU than another motherboard. Or there's a mounting pressure difference, or there's a... Like, there are so many potential, you know, differences between the motherboards that it's just like, yeah, no. I'm not, like, measuring from the back of the socket. Like, it's nice to get an idea of what's happening, but it doesn't actually, like, you can't really use it as, like, an objective measurement as far as I'm concerned. And even this is not ideal because, like, well, like, my scope's not that great. Well, the 20 megahertz, like, it's not a bandwidth issue. It's just, like... the probe I'm using is like Intel spec for doing voltage regulator performance measurements. Is you're supposed to use a probe with like 1 picofarad of capacitance. This one has like 13 picofarads. So Yeah, it's really not great because it's basically going to be the extra capacitance means that the probe's not going to be showing us like it's potentially lowering the amplitude of the peaks. So it's kind of unfortunate, but yeah, there's not really anything like. The thing is, like when you want a 1 picofarad probe, you're looking at active probes that are like hundreds of dollars at the very least, and then it's like you also need special scopes for using those, which my scope doesn't work with like straight up active probes. So yeah, I'm screwed. I can't get more accurate measurements than this. Even though it'd be really cool if I could. But now that I know that this is possible, we'll maybe see like if I ever like do similar measurements at like gigabyte again or something like that, then I'll have a modified CPU like this again, instead of trying to measure from the back of the motherboard, because this should be so much better. Keyword should. I've not yet checked how reliable this is, right? But anyway, so let's run the 128 FFT size, and I'm expecting like 170 millivolts peak to peak on this. Okay, 160. I mean, that's still not great. Right, and now our maximum voltage is like 1.52 volts, which again, I'm not actually sure if that's harmful to the CPU. You'd have to ask Intel. They might be able to tell you. The average voltage is it's reading a bit high, which I assume is because I am actually measuring from like the edge of the CPU package, not not like ideally you'd want to measure from like a capacitor right behind the core, but well, like behind the actual die, but there's no way you're getting wires there. And I could move the vCore wire further down the vCore plane, but the ground plane on the CPU is just like, it's like the only place to get it is on the very outer edge. So I can't really do much about that. So yeah, it's still reading a little bit high, but it's better than measuring from the back of the socket, because I don't even want to know what's on the back of the socket right now. Also, I'm actually really surprised that the ASRock motherboard is reading so accurately. I guess they're doing something similar to what Asus is doing with the op-amp to replicate the core voltage to the, well, to replicate the DyeSense voltage to the Super I/O, or they literally just hooked up the Super I/O to the DyeSense lines, which would be very surprising. But I don't know. Maybe they did that. Anyway, yeah, now we're getting significantly more peak to peak, right? Like, it's, what, 157 millivolts on average peak to peak, so that's really not great. Yeah, I wouldn't run level 1 LLC on this at all. And if we run small FFTs with just 16, because otherwise, like, if you don't fix the, if you don't run one FFT size for both inputs, then it'll cycle through a variety of different FFTs, and that just screws up the measurement. Yeah, but interestingly enough, small FFTs really isn't that bad. All right, like, it's worse than before by, again, about 20 millivolts, but it's not that bad. Right, it's, what, 130 millivolts peak to peak, whereas the, well, 125, whereas previously we were getting like 157 with the 128K. So, yeah, anyway, well, we've seen all of these kinds of scope shots before, haven't we? So I think nobody cares at this point. It's just like, BuildZoid, you've done this with the Gene, except you did it from the back of the motherboard, except not from the CPU. So let's take an actual look at the measuring device. So we're just going to shut this down. And I'm just going to put this in studio mode. Yeah. There we go, it turned off, and bam. So here's the setup. We have a little 40 millimeter fan. This actually is doing a great job of keeping the VRM cool. That little 40 millimeter. It's significantly quieter than what I was using during the VRM thermal testing. Anyway, yeah, we're gonna tear this down. So I'm just gonna turn the PSU off. And well, this is gonna be an adventure. I've not actually had to disassemble it yet when it was fully assembled. So we'll see if I break it or not. Memory out. I should have kept the low profile GPU. Get the cables out. This out of the way. Plug you. Plug this. Yeah, the probe's actually a bit of a problem. Yeah, okay. I'm not getting the probe out of there, so we're just going to leave that. You know, it's funny. I actually bought, like, really long screws to get around, like, reaching in hard places, because you can just, you know, well, screws, no, nuts. Well, basically they're standoffs, but they're, like, female on both ends, so and so they're ideal for, like, well, I shouldn't use these. It's basically to replace those so that you don't have to, like, have small hands to reach in. Come on, go. So there's our CPU. Hop, and actually you can mostly see what's going on. So I need to put the radiator away. Up. Oh, there we go. So get the 8-pin out of the way so you can see better. Yeah, so here's the idea, is just we have the oscilloscope probe right here. That hooks up to this tiny little, like, connector thing. Yeah, and it just sits really snugly in that. And unfortunately, I can't really, like, for better accuracy, you would ideally want shorter wires. But the problem is, I can't run shorter wires because I'm not going to be able to, like the probe's not going to fit at that point. So I'd need, like, some kind of custom water block thing that's, like, just as big as the IHS, and then there's, like, nothing else there, so that I could get the probe really close. But most water blocks are, like, they'll go all the way up to basically, like, the mounting mechanism. So yeah, I can't really do anything about that unless I get a custom block for the CPU. That is, like, really, really small in terms of the actual block itself, which potentially is, like, could lead to some cooling performance issues. Anyway, let's get this out. So yeah, and the wires are just sort of run through the hold down mechanism. We just need to carefully extract the CPU. And the IHS is free floating because, oh, there we go. So there's the test device. Ugh. And I forgot that the PSU is not in the shot. So there we go. No. Ta-da! Yeah. So, and the wires are actually glued into place so that they don't break off, because that was a major concern. And the whole idea is basically, there's a V-core power plane running through that area, and there's a ground plane that's, like, the ground plane on these is, like, sometimes on the edge of the CPU you can find a ground plane. So that's what that's hooked up to. And yeah, and that measures the V-core. And it's just an 8700K. As for the IHS, well, you know, I had to clear a bit of the IHS away so that I can get the wires in there. So it's chewed up like that. And so, yeah, it's not necessarily, like, ideally, because I am measuring from, like, the outer edge of the V-core power plane on the CPU. So there's actually going to still be, like, voltage drop from, like, where I'm measuring to the actual core. Because, yeah, ideally you'd want to measure off of, like, the capacitors on the back, but I'm not, like, I don't want to be running wires through the actual pins, which, like, would theoretically be possible. It's just that that is such a delicate configuration that I don't want to deal with it. So this is the next best thing. Because at the very least, like, I believe that the voltage drop across the CPU's substrate should be consistent across all motherboards. Right, like, if I measure from these 2 points on the CPU in every single board, I should get the same, like, the results shouldn't be affected by the measurement location anymore. And yeah, so it's kind of the setup. I'll just reinstall it, actually, because I do want to take a bunch of measurements for this board. So, up. Like that. Up. And yeah, and the IHS is free floating because there's liquid metal under there, so I'm going to need something to support it while it locks in. Go. Yeah, that's good enough. The main thing with reinstalling like CPUs with free-floating IHSs is that the IHS doesn't slide off the CPU, because the mounting mechanism will actually push it away. So, yeah. Anyway, that's the Probinator 8700. Hopefully it works as well as I think it works. And I can now take a bunch of I can measure, so I want to test this motherboard, I want to test my Maximus 11 Gene, I want to test the Z390 Aorus Master, I want to test the Z390 Dark, I want to test the, what else is there? I want to test those are sort of the priority motherboards for me, like the Gene, this thing, the MSI Z390i Gaming Edge AC, the little ITX board, because that one, this board, so, what's really cool is this has proven that this board's voltage measurement is actually surprisingly accurate, so I wonder how ASRock's actually doing that. Because, as far as I know, it's just Asus literally advertises that, hey, we have this, op-amp that replicates the voltage reading from the controller to the Super I/O, so that the Super I/O isn't measuring garbage, because normally it would just measure from the back of the CPU socket, and that measurement should be way higher than what the actual CPU is seeing, because this 8700K, the power draw, I think the reported power draw in software for this chip was 200 watts. So at the voltages that we were running, you'd be looking at 140 amps. 140 amps across the pins of the CPU socket actually lead to a pretty significant voltage drop, and we can actually measure that now. We can, just measure from that right there the voltage drop across the CPU socket as well, which previously, I mean, again, it's not perfect, but yeah, I can try and measure the voltage drop across the CPU socket, which is pretty neat. And yeah, we can test that. So yeah, this is just kind of neat little test system I have. And I'm thinking that for Z490, I'd like to make this. I'd really like to make this as well for Ryzen. But the problem with Ryzen is that the CPUs, they're soldered. So that's one of the things that was a big concern for me. Why did I do this with an 8700K and not a 9900K? Well, 9900Ks cost way more money than 8700Ks. So huge thanks to the patrons for funding this thing. Yeah, I'm not getting free CPUs to do this to them. Yeah, so thanks to the patrons for funding this thing, but basically 9900K costs too much. The 9900K is also soldered, which is just so that doesn't mean they're impossible to delid, but it means okay, so once you do delid the CPU, what do you you'd basically need to, because the solder is really tall, it's really thick. So then you'd need to figure out some way to get the IHS to the same height as the CPU die again, and then yeah, it would just basically be a mess to deal with. So I'm actually kind of worried for Z490. We're probably going to be seeing soldered IHSs again, so that's going to be one hell of an adventure to do this. I might need a custom IHS at that point. Man, that is going to suck. Yeah, but I still need to check that this is measuring as accurately as I hope it is, and if it is, then yeah, this is awesome. I totally want to build this for every CPU socket I can, because well, the thing is, it's also a convenience thing. I can actually take measurements from a motherboard sitting in a test bench, because previously if I wanted to take measurements from the back of the socket, you have to figure out some way to either get the motherboard upside down or install the motherboard inside a case and then measure from behind the through the cutout for the heatsink. So yeah, this is great. This is awesome. I love the Probinator 8700. So, and hopefully it'll have successors like the Probinator 10900. I think that's the next chip, 10900K. And then what else? I'd like to do as I said, I'd like to do a Ryzen one, but that is just going to be the thing is, actually, a 3700X is probably a really bad candidate for this, because, the thing is you might be wondering, why did you go for an 8700K? Why not something cheaper if the 9900K is too expensive? Well, the thing is, if I went for a cheaper chip, I wouldn't be able to pull as much power into it, right? Because that's the thing is, with a hyper-threaded 6-core, you can get to roughly the same power consumption as, a 9700K. But it costs less than a 9700K. So, and a 9700K is closer to a 9900K than like an i3 8350K, right? Like an i3 like that, that's a quad core with no hyperthreading. Like it's gonna pull like 80 amps or something at full load. And so the VR, like the worst case scenario transients are just gonna be much, much lower. And then it's just like, well, you know, that's useless. Well, potentially it's just gonna make the measurements more difficult to take. So, yeah. Anyway. Didn't really have much of a plan for this video because I literally finished building this thing yesterday. I've only really played with it today a little bit and yesterday a bit because like building this thing, it was a bit of an adventure because I actually have I don't have like a schematic for the substrate of these CPUs. So I basically went and like dug through started scratching off bits of the solder mask going like, please be ground, please be ground. I already found VCore. VCore's easy because I have a dead 7350K. So with the dead 7350K, I already found the VCore because there's just like a bunch of VCore pins in that area and there's this great big power plane and it's just like, well, I wonder what that could be. Yeah, it's VCore. But before I found ground, I accidentally found the iGPU power plane, which is like right next to VCore, which kind of sucks. And also this has given me the idea like, well, if you wanted to, you could theoretically scratch off all of the solder mask on like the front of the CPU for the VCore. And then like there are some ground planes, like there's a ground plane hiding in like this area of the CPU. There's a ground plane over here-ish, which is not a convenient location whatsoever, but there is a ground plane there. And there might be a ground plane in this area because I can't think of anything else that would be there. Memory power is probably somewhere in like this lower area. Actually, they might have memory power. No, because it should be like, as far as I know, memory power normally goes like this. And then it goes like a straight line. Like this cap right here should be in line with the memory power plane to the CPU. So, yeah, up in this corner, there probably is just a bunch of ground. I can't, like, I don't know, right? I don't have a schematic, but the thing is what I'm basically thinking is like, well, if I have a VCore plane and I have ground planes, I can attach capacitors directly to the CPU like this, which on a socket like this is actually then I'd really need a custom cooling system because yeah, if there's capacitors sticking out, then you can forget about mounting a water block. But it's just like dumb ideas that I've come up with after doing this. Is like, hey, we could try. I've already cap modded a CPU from behind, but now we can do it from the front as well. So yeah, and theoretically also this I could mess around with adding capacitors to the back of the CPU and seeing if it has any impact on the measurements with this, which would be really that's also the other cool potential because in theory, trying to measure the impact of capacitors that are attached to the CPU through the CPU socket, their impact should be lessened, in theory. So, yeah, that's kind of that for this video. So hopefully this was somewhat interesting, even though I don't think it's really presenting any new information. It's just kind of like, look, I have a new toy to play with. Yeah, hopefully this spits out some interesting results for a bunch of the motherboards that I plan to test. So yeah, this board, Gene, Master, what else? I'm kind of worried for the Master. I'm legitimately kind of worried for the Master because I already tested that board at Gigabyte. I tested a motherboard with a similar VRM for Ryzen at Gigabyte HQ, and it wasn't really doing that great. And it's just like, oh man. Oh, I also have a Z390 Aorus Pro somewhere. I guess I could use that. Oh, I want to test the Z370 Gaming 7 because that's an intersil VRM. So, yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Because most Gigabyte motherboards are actually all of the Gene is an international rectifier VRM. The Master is an international rectifier VRM. Well, the Aorus Pro is an intersil, but it's not like high-end intersil. I want to test high-end intersil. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's it. That's legitimately it for the video, so let's end it here. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comments section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, including abuse of CPUs like this, I do have a Patreon where you can support me directly, or there's a AHOC Teespring store where you can just buy AHOC merch like shirts, stickers, posters, socks, that kind of thing. And yeah, and you know, both Patreon and the Teespring, like they fund stupid ideas like this. Well, arguably stupid. If this were like if right now there's a good chance that this is stupid, but yeah, it should, like, I hope it works well. I really do hope it works well. Anyway, so yeah, that's it. I did just do my outro, so I guess I'll just hit the stop button now. Which mouse was? Oh, this mouse. Right. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and goodbye.